Brothers and sisters, gather close, because tonight I'm not starting with a whisper, I'm starting with a scream that's been choking in the throat of history for 400 years. Imagine the year as 1823. The moon hangs low over the cane fields of Louisiana, fat and yellow like a bruised peach. The big house is quiet, all shutters drawn, all candles snuffed. But out in the quarter, the night is alive with the sound of chains that don't rattle anymore because the iron has worn grooves into ankles like wedding rings. And in that darkness, under a sky that doesn't care, the plantation lady, Miss Annabelle they called her, though her real name was something colder, steps barefoot across the dew-wet grass. Her nightgown clings to her thighs. Her hair is loose, a pale river down her back. She smells of lavender water and bourbon and something darker. Something hungry. She walks past the cabins where mothers clutch babies to their breasts, praying the night will keep its mouth shut. She walks until she finds him. Josiah, 25 years old, shoulders like ox yokes, skin the color of midnight after a storm. He is mending a harness by the light of a single tallow candle, because tomorrow the overseer will whip him if the leather isn't perfect. He doesn't look up when her shadow falls across him. He knows that shadow. Every slave on the place knows that shadow. She doesn't speak. She simply reaches out, fingers trembling like moth wings, and touches the nape of his neck. One touch. That's all it takes. Because power doesn't need words when it owns the air you breathe. And Josiah, God forgive him, God forgive us all, he closes his eyes and lets her lead him behind the smokehouse where the hogs root and grunt in their sleep. Because refusal is a word that gets men castrated. Refusal is a word that gets women sold south. Refusal is a luxury whiter than her skin. So he follows, and she takes, and the night swallows the sound of it. But that was just the first time. It became a ritual, every new moon, every time her husband rode to New Orleans to drink and gamble and pretend he was master of more than dead and disappointment. She would come, perfumed and half mad with wanting something she could never name in daylight. And Josiah, because he was a man, because he was human, because the body betrays even when the soul screams, Josiah would meet her. Not with love, never with love, but with the terrible mathematics of survival. Months passed. Bellies began to swell under coarse Osnaburg dresses. First 1, then 3, then 7, then 12. Girls who had never been touched by any man except in the fields when the overseer laughed and looked away. Girls who cried into their aprons at night, not understanding why their bodies were ripening with a harvest they never planted. The midwife, old Aunt Ruth, knew. She knew the moment she laid hands on the first swollen belly. She knew because the child kicked like it already carried a whip in its tiny fist. She knew because the eyes were wrong. Too light, too cold, gray-green like the river after a storm when the bodies float. And then the whispers started. Not in the big house. Never in the big house, but in the quarter, behind hands, in the dark, where truth can finally stretch its legs. She been down here, every month, like a mare in heat. That's why he ain't been whipped in a year. That's why he eats at the back door now. That's why them babies comin' out lookin' like ghosts. And the plantation lady, she sat on her veranda sipping lemonade while her belly grew round and tight beneath layers of silken lies. She told her husband it was his. A miracle after 10 years of barrenness. He believed her because men like him believe whatever keeps the world tidy. He threw a barbecue, killed 3 hogs, bragged to the neighbors about his virility. But the slaves knew. They always know. They knew when the first baby was born. Little Delphine, with hair the color of corn silk and eyes that looked straight through you like she was already counting sins. They knew when the second came screaming, fists clenched like she was ready to fight the world from the first breath. They knew when the third, the fourth, the 10th arrived, each one lighter than the last, each one carrying the curse of looking like freedom but being born into chains. 12 babies, 12 girls, all with their father's cheekbones and their mother's damnation. And Miss Annabelle, she named them after flowers. Rose, Lily, Violet, Jasmine, as if pretty names could wash the blood off what she'd done. But names don't change blood. And blood, oh, blood remembers. Because these weren't just children. These were the living proof that power doesn't just own bodies. It breeds them. It plants itself in wombs like a crop of thorns. It grows monsters dressed in Sunday dresses who would one day sit in the big house themselves, whipping the darker ones who looked just like their grandmothers. Do you see it, church? Do you see the horror of it? This wasn't about lust. This was about dominion. This was a woman who owned human beings deciding she would own their seed too. This was a woman who looked at a man in chains and said, "I will take your future and wear it like a brooch." This was the original theft. Not just of labor, not just of life, but of lineage. Of legacy. Of the one thing that was supposed to belong to God alone, the creation of life. She didn't just sleep with the slave. She colonized the future. Every time she spread her legs in that smokehouse, she wasn't just sinning, she was rewriting bloodlines. She was making sure that even freedom, if it came, would be poisoned. Because how do you free a child who looks like the master's wife? How do you tell her she's not property when her face is the deed? Those 12 girls grew up between two worlds that hated them both. Too white for the quarter. Too black for the porch. Called bright by the whites who wanted to bed them. Called yellow trash by the blacks who knew where they came from. They learned early that their beauty was a brand. That their bodies were battlegrounds their parents had already lost. Some of them ended up in the big house, sewing fine seams while their half-sisters ordered them around. Some ended up in New Orleans, in those octoroon balls where men bid on the privilege of ruining them properly. Some ended up dead by their own hands because the mirror lied every morning. And Josiah, he watched them grow, watched his daughters, curtsy to the woman who destroyed them both. Watched them call her, Miss, while she pretended not to notice how much they looked like her in certain lights. He died with his mouth full of unsaid words. They buried him behind the pecan tree with no marker. Just another field hand who got above himself. But the story doesn't end there. Because those 12 girls had children. And those children had children. And somewhere down the line, in the 1890s, one of those great-granddaughters, light-skinned, green-eyed, hair that wouldn't kink no matter how much lye you put on it, walked into a courthouse in Alabama and swore she was white. Passed, vanished into whiteness like smoke. Took her children with her. Erased the past with a lie that looked like truth. And on the other side, another branch stayed black. Stayed furious. Stayed poor. Stayed close to the land that had swallowed their ancestors' tears. They told the story at fish fries and funerals. They whispered it to children who didn't understand yet why grandma's eyes went dead when certain names were mentioned. 200 years later, we're still living in the wreckage of that smokehouse. Because every time we argue about who's really black, we're arguing about Miss Annabelle's womb. Every time we talk about colorism, who gets the good hair, who gets the paper bag test, who gets to be the pretty tragedy instead of the ugly truth, we're talking about those 12 babies. Every time a light-skinned girl is told she's not black enough, and a dark-skinned girl is told she's not pretty enough, we're hearing the echo of a white woman's moan in the dark. Every time we draw lines between house and field, between woke and not woke, between who deserves sympathy and who deserves suspicion, we're still sleeping in the beds she made. This is the original sin of America, not just that they stole bodies, but that they raped the future. They didn't just break families. They built new ones in the image of their sickness. And we, black people, white people, all of us, are still trying to figure out which parts of us belong to love and which parts belong to that night behind the smokehouse. But here's where the gospel comes in. Because the same Bible that was used to justify all of it, the same Bible they beat into us with a strap, has a word for what Miss Annabelle did. It's called abomination, not because of the sex, but because of the power. God never minded the mixing of flesh. God minded the mixing of mastery and slavery in the same bed. God never damned love across lines. God damned the lie that one kind of flesh could own another. And God, listen to me now, God kept track of every tear that fell on those 12 babies' faces. God kept track of Josiah's silence. God kept track of the way Miss Annabelle's hands shook when she held her own child and saw Josiah's eyes looking back at her. God is still keeping track. Because redemption doesn't erase the past. Redemption tells the truth about it. And the truth is this: we are all, every one of us, children of that plantation. Children of violation. Children of survival. Children of a God who specializes in making straight lines out of our crooked ones. The question is, will we keep passing down the curse, or will we finally break it? Will we keep measuring each other by how much or how little of Miss Annabelle we carry in our veins? Or will we look at each other, really look, and see the image of a God who was in that smokehouse too? Not blessing it, not approving it, but weeping over it, weeping over Josiah, weeping over those 12 girls, weeping over every child born into a story somebody else tried to write with violence. Because here's the secret the plantation never wanted us to know. Blood doesn't lie, but it also doesn't get the last word. Grace does. And grace says, you are not what was done to you. You are not your mother's sin or your father's silence. You are not the child of the big house or the child of the quarter. You are the child of the God who saw it all and loved you anyway. So tonight, I'm asking you, begging you, to stop running from the story. Stop lightening it, stop darkening it, stop trying to pass for something you're not. Own it, all of it, the shame, the strength, the way your nose flares like your great-grandma who never got to sit on the porch. The way your eyes go green in the sun like the woman who tried to own her. Own it all, because only when we own the whole ugly, beautiful truth can we lay it down at the altar and say, this happened, this hurt, this is not the end. Those 12 girls are your ancestors. Josiah is your ancestor. Miss Annabelle is your ancestor. And Jesus, hanging bloody on a Roman cross, despised and rejected, acquainted with grief, he is your ancestor too. And he says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden with 400 years of somebody else's sin, and I will give you rest. Rest from performing, rest from passing, rest from pretending the past didn't happen. Rest in the truth that makes you free. So tonight, church, I'm not asking you to forgive Miss Annabelle. I'm asking you to outlive her, outlove her, outtruth her. I'm asking you to be the generation that finally tells the whole story, not to hurt, but to heal. To look at every face in this room, light, dark, and every shade between, and say, I know where you came from. And I love you anyway. Because we are more than what was done to us in the dark. That's the gospel for tonight. That's the word for right now. We are the children of the smokehouse. But we are not prisoners of it anymore. Because the same God who saw what happened behind that smokehouse is the same God who rolled away the stone. And resurrection doesn't deny the nails. It just proves they don't get the last word. Can I get an amen?